Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Obviously, we are slightly late because of lunch. We can start this new session. It is a special session dedicated to the various situations that concern us in economy and politics, international relations in general. And we have the opportunity to have Professor Romano Prodi with us. We have already listened to him this morning in his first contribution. With him, we have the opportunity to develop some of our reflections on some very complex topics. I recall that Professor Romano Prodi is an economist. He has led the IRI, an important Italian holding, and he also led our government in Italy. He was also president of the European Commission during Lacchia period in the past 50 years. And all the work carried out between the year 2000 and 2005, it was done to save the Europeistic policies. Starting off from the Kyoto Protocol, Professor Prodi, in the last semester of his presidency, managed to save, to rescue the protocol itself, since he managed to obtain a lot of support, because President Bush had decided to not to support the climate agreement. So Professor Prodi went to Moscow. He went to speak to President Putin so that that treaty could survive. And it was then transformed in the COP21 of Paris. Just to recall that the situation is not such as to be decoupled from the economic trend, and it is very much part of the intricate set of relations, international relations, that we are going to discuss now with Professor Prodi. There are new decisions taken over the past week, with an update, recent update by the American administration, John Bolton, about, and I'm referring to the orientations of the approach of President Trump's presidency. For some aspects, we have been closed to the destabilization of some relations, with the withdrawal of the United States from the treaty to reduce the medium-range missiles. A new situation opens up. My question is, for many years we were perhaps preoccupied, over-concerned with the possibility of seeing a new Cold War. Is this the situation? Well, it is not very easy to interpret the decision taken by President Trump. For some months, it was difficult to see a reason for that orientation, the orientation of the American government, but the America First approach is something real, very real. The problem is not the tension with Russia, but the fact that China was not in the treaty, and the U.S. wanted to have a free hand. This is the great challenge that has started from the commercial point of view. We hope that a step backwards can be taken and that everything is going to stop there. A few years ago, we were just joking about it. The Thucydides effect, the consolidated power threatened by an emerging power. And now we are seeing precisely that. The issue of the missiles is part of the strategy. China is out of the treaty. The US don't want the treaty anymore because of the tension that they are having with Russia, but most of all because they don't want China to be free in their decisions. And then there is US trying to contain China. Trump had already announced that through some diplomatic decisions, especially from the military point of view in the countries surrounding China. China had become the main interlocutor, the main counterpart for the US. But from the geopolitical point of view, we have the United States, China, and Russia and Europe, four players. The US are sending a message to Russia because they want China to understand that they are going to be the next target of attention. They wanted to tell China that China will never have the military supremacy on the United States. And the fourth player, that is Europe, is acting as the theater, an experimentation place, because if missiles are going to be deployed, that means we are going 30 years back. We have to remember the gospel here. All divided kingdoms are set to lose. Or, as we say in the south of Italy, if you turn into a sheep, the wolf will eat you up. So we are seeing great changes around the world. And I think we have a huge role to play. Not as a superpower, because in this phase of history this is not a matter, but becoming a sort of referee in order to allay the tensions between China and the States. There are no other mediators or possible buffers in the world. Europe is the only possibility. This is what worries me, that we are not really doing that yet. I hope that over time Europe can recover its role and a political role actively around the world. Like I said this morning, we are still leaders in industrial production. We are important exporters, so we are still an important country, but it is a political problem. The power from the supranational level to the national level of the Council has lost its unity. Now it is just the legitimate national interests that are prevailing over the community interests. This is the role that Europe is playing today. So today's Europe, and here it's almost a rhetorical question, can Europe be have a better, a greater weight if the relations with Russia can change, can be improved, because Russia is gradually going towards China. Don't you think there should be balancing of this geopolitical relations that are being consolidated between Beijing and Moscow? Because in this scenario, Europe is really stuttering almost. Well, you can have that role if there is one single decision-making approach. If you recall Iraq, the war in Libya, there have been several situations in which Europe could not have a united role, and the same goes in the case of our relations with Russia. There are countries such as Germany, Italy, France that feel that the relation with the good relations with Russia is absolutely essential, both for Russia and for Europe. So that is based on political decision-making and unanimous decision-making. It is here that there is a possibility to recover dynamic political situation. You have mentioned France. France is one of the countries that could have a more constructive relation with Russia, unlike others. We can also mention Great Britain that has a different relation with Russia recently. But since Macron went to power, there has been a change. They moved from prejudice towards the Russian president, and now there is a more realistic possibility to relate with Russia, an important country. Just 1 month ago, Macron made a speech. He was talking to his ambassadors, and he outlined a new situation, a new scenario. He said that this was meant to develop from the end of the Cold War, without prejudice to the principles that have to be respected in Ukraine, for example, within the framework of the Minsk agreement, etc. But he underlined the importance to have a very solid, sound relations with a country that is sort of crossroads between our crowded European continent and the very powerful and very crowded country that is China. So who you think should continue this sort of work in Europe, in the light of your experience in the European Commission and as a person, as an expert of the European Parliament mechanisms, who could decide what to do? The Cold War is over and alliances are no longer guaranteed. So we have the US on one side and China on the other side. So who? Well, your question already contains a reply because you mentioned France, but I refer to Europe because the problem is what has been happening in Europe lately. We said that the power is going from the upper level to the Council, which is a representation of the national countries. The European Council is appointed by the stronger country, that is Germany, and then Macron goes to power. And he used the European anthem when he was appointed. So, what in the Westphalian state, there was the army and the currency as the two main pillars. Now we have a common currency, and I thought that France would start to speak about the possibility of having a common army. Then we had Brexit. a European agreement would have been needed to coordinate the use of nuclear weapons, for example, and the second pillar would have been created, and Europe could have been an important political subject again. But Macron preferred to speak just for France. They started bombing Syria without consulting the Germans. The French went and bombed Libya without involving the Italians. So the situation is more and more complex. Germany says if you have the monopoly of the foreign policy, that then we take care of the economic policy. But if you have an engine with the two different mechanisms working in parallel, you go nowhere. If you have different coalitions and different candidates to the presidency, and if you have a real political discussion, then you can recreate the political subject. And this doesn't mean to say that we cannot have a two-tier Europe. Not that there are minor or major countries, but that there may be different requirements. So why are our citizens so disillusioned? The euro as a currency was received as something wonderful, and then it was gradually criticized more and more, simply because there has not been a common policy, and we did not go beyond the pillars of the economic policy. The decisions, the technical, just only technical decisions have come from the European Union. They have legislated on anything in the medical sector, which is good, but we need a different type of decision-making. We need political decisions for the future. So another question. In May, we're going to have the European elections. What type of risks, what type of difficulties can we envisage? Well, like I said, this is going to be a great opportunity if we can have, provided that we can have a real political competition like there should be. We've seen shifting towards the right of the People's Party, the European People's Party, suggested by Weber, also including Eurosceptical parties such as Orban's party. If, in addition to this, there is a center-left coalition, including the Liberals, the Socialists, Macron's supporters, and the Greens, and the Green Party, then if we have different candidates, we can have a healthy political discussion to change the European fate, European future. And this is good. This can happen even among parties that do not have an actual identity. In the European elections, there is a proportional system, so you don't need a larger party. You have to have common ideas to designate the candidates. We have a huge capacity, a huge possibility. Just think about Brexit. A lot of people have changed their minds. they regret their decision to leave the EU. And some are suggesting to repeat the referendum, the Brexit referendum. And there are public protests. The citizens are taking the streets because before these changes that you see around the world, the citizens are realizing that Great Britain, the United Kingdom, is a small country after all. At my age, I can act as a preacher, and when I go and preach and talk to students, for example, especially to foreign students, I tell them, well, I'm Italian, and during the Renaissance, we were leaders. The Italian states were leaders in war, the art of peace, in philosophy, in accounting. They used to lend money around the world. And then, after the discovery of the Americas, none of our states could build ships, for example. The ships were required to sail in this new sea, and we totally disappeared from the map for centuries. Now, this is a second globalization. Now we have the new commanders in the world, Google, all the large social networks. And I also refer to China and not only to Europe, because either we join our forces or we end up like Italy did in the 16th or 17th century. We just disappeared. We used to say it is the same whether France or Spain in Italy, provided that we can eat. And we are about to start the same period all over again. So whenever I speak about Europe, and I always tell students this, that it is important to understand history. So if I understand well, there is this concern about the Eurosceptical forces that can not necessarily be an evil for Europe. So what is important is this dialogue, this discussion that can be in Europe. Exactly, because there can be Eurosceptical opinions, but I don't think they are going to prevail. They are growing, yes. But if we go to the elections with a program about Europe and not with fake European programs based on struggle, on the fight among countries, we can prevail because the citizens have a sense of the future, but we have to give it to them, to give them this sense of the future. We need policies. We don't need mediations. You've mentioned that there is this desire of authority in Europe, not just in Europe, but around the world. This is why we should think about this seriously. In the Philippines, Duterte has a very wide support. Trials are often not even made there, and people are killed. Then a lot of authority in China, then Hungary, the United States. The decision to elect Trump is also tantamount to a desire for authority. And the same is happening in Italy. There is this sort of feeling around the citizens. It is not today's topic. We are talking about the relations between Europe and Russia, but either democracy can resume its force of attraction, or otherwise this sense of the force that democracy has had for many centuries can go lost. I don't want to be too academic. I'm just referring to my life experience. During my work, you have mentioned the roles I had in my career. Whenever I spoke to Chinese leaders, we would say, well, we are developing, they would say that we are a developing country, we have to understand certain aspects. And 1 year ago, at the Communist Congress, the statement was, we can deliver. We are the country that has reached 6% economic growth every year. And now everybody is looking to us and not to Europe. And when I speak about the evolution of democracies, I do that including the new countries. If you think about the satisfaction with which in the past years the United Nations would list the countries where elections are taking place, a way of measuring democracy through the use of elections, you can see that in the African countries or in Latin America, the winners feel as if they have conquered the country. And now the political tensions are between the democratically elected leaders who do not want to leave power when the mandate is over. So there is an evolution towards this authoritarianism around the world. It is a fact. It is a historical change that is epoch-making. And I also mentioned the change of power in the economy of the world. 20 years ago, among the leaders of fortune, we had General Electric, General Motors, Exxon, oil companies, etc. And today we have these new companies, virtual companies that have developed an actual domain on our countries, and cyclically we have the politics prevailing over the economy. We are still waiting for that. By using the duties, excise duties, yes, of course, that is a very powerful tool. President Trump suggested a fracture with China, and I was expecting a sort of revolution by the multinationals, but nothing happened. By breaking up with China, they would have incredible repercussions. But it is interesting. I interpret this that in saying that obviously there is a strengthening of the world of politics against the economic world. All of this shall have to be studied, analyzed in the future, but we have to be ready to interpret, understand the changes that we are seeing today. This is very interesting. We have just a couple of minutes for some questions. This morning you said that in order to break the stalemate between Europe and Russia, both countries have, or groups of countries have to take a step forward. Such as, I repeat what I said this morning, we have Eurasia, you have the European Union, a lot of tensions that are harming all of us. Let us organize a conference, a sort of dialogue to really discuss the problems that we can solve together. And a discussion between Russia and the European Union, I would rather refer to Eurasia, not just Russia, to represent the interests of two large economic blocs that geographically are very close to one another, but which at the moment have some problems and should get even closer. Last question. In 10 days' time, you're going to see the midterm elections in the States. With the present level of control that President Trump has, we know that this control may change. Do you think you can forecast a lame duck in the Congress? Not in terms of what we've been discussing here, the challenge with China, the problems with China. The American problems are different. Today we are really seeing a big challenge in terms of supremacy, of primacy. So again, Europe should act as a mediator. It is a peacemaking mission that our continent should have. Thank you very much. We thank Professor Romano Prodi for his contribution.
Ensuring that business conditions are both non-discriminatory and transparent is a high priority task when discussing the idea of building a common economic space between the Atlantic and Pacific.